Corruption and reform, the bedrock of recent conversations on policing. Today, the Home Office announced measures that it says will make rooting out rogue police officers easier. The government statement uses really bold, proactive language. The Home Secretary talks about taking swift and robust action to sack officers. The Policing Minister talks about restoring trust. They're very familiar phrases. Importantly, the detail of today's announcement has left many people scratching their heads. Let's take one of the proposed changes, that senior officers chairing misconduct panels. At the moment, panels are led by legally qualified chairs. John Bassett is one of those people. Is it a regressive step, having senior officers chairing misconduct hearings?
I would consider it is, because we were introduced back in 2016 to bring fairness, transparency. You have the situation if a matter is chaired by a senior officer. The question is whether he is going to exert undue influence over those other panel members.
The mishandled cases of Wayne Couzens and David Carrick stunned and baffled, and prompted a flurry of promises from the Metropolitan Police, as well as calls from its commissioner for more powers. Earlier this month, Mark Rowley argued that LQCs are softer on standards, with hearings led by them more than twice as likely to dismiss black or minority ethnic officers. So he seems to be suggesting that LQCs have a systemic inequality within them.
If you put a disproportionately high number of non-white officers before the misconduct panels, there's likely to be a greater proportion of such officers dismissed when compared with white officers.
He highlights that those disproportionate referrals for misconduct were reported in Baroness Casey's review. Today's announcement says police officers found guilty of gross misconduct will face automatic dismissal, and officers who fail vetting will be sacked.
Are they thinking from the very first point of disclosure to the police about an allegation, how that's being investigated, how the victim in that case is being supported? And we don't know. I can't sit here as the Domestic Abuse Commissioner for England and Wales and tell you what each force has done.
The government says these reforms are about giving the public a high level of professionalism.
This is one top-level decision that's been made. But what needs to be looked at is fundamentally inside policing, what has led to continuous processes that have failed our community, have failed officers and staff as well. And unless you change the process, it doesn't matter what the end product looks like.
As for misconduct panels, an independent lawyer will still be present, but in a supporting position. There's no further detail on what that means practically, but Mark Rowley says chief officers will feel empowered to uphold the highest standards.
Well, earlier I sat down with the Policing Minister, Chris Philp, and I began by asking him whether allowing senior officers, rather than those independent lawyers, chairing misconduct hearings was simply letting the police mark their own homework.
Well, to be clear, they will chair the panel, but it's a three-person panel and two of the three members are independent. That's very important. But, when I was first appointed a few months ago, I spoke to Mark Rowley, the Met Commissioner, who said there were officers serving in the Met who he wanted to dismiss, but the previous system had allowed to remain in the force. And I think it's reasonable that if we're asking Chief Constables to run an organisation, run a police force, deliver a service for the public, build public confidence, make sure officers who don't deserve to serve get kicked out, that they have an increased role, and that's what today's changes ensure.
But the Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall is being investigated over serious allegations of sexual offences that he denies. The former acting commissioner of the Met is being investigated by the watchdog, the IOPC, over comments he allegedly made about rape, he denies. The ex-Cleveland police chief has been barred from serving over sexual comments made to colleagues. The problems that we've seen in the police go right to the top, don't they?
Yeah, and those people you just referred to are not serving at present because of the incidents or the allegations that you've referred to. And as I say, there are two independent members on the panel, one of whom is legally qualified. Look, it's also, I think, worth making clear that the vast majority of police officers are dedicated, but what we're determined to do is make sure that small minority who let down the police force and let down the public get really quickly dealt with.
And you've extended the ban on zombie knives. The number of people killed with a knife in England and Wales in 2021 to 22 reached the highest on record for 76 years. This is actually the 6th time in 7 years you've made an announcement on zombie knives. If you'd actually done what you'd said first time, a lot of often young lives might have been saved.
Well, I say I've been in post for a matter of a few months, and this loophole in the law was drawn to my attention. For example,
so your predecessors screwed up, did they?
Well, I wouldn't say that, because they tightened the law, and what I'm doing is tightening it even further. We're funding, I think it's £170 million over a period of 3 years, violence reduction units where young people who are at risk of getting drawn into gang violence get mentored, they get given diversionary activities. We work with them to try and put them onto a better path. I'm also keen to see the widespread use of stop and search, done respectfully, of course, to take knives off our streets. Stop and search takes 400 knives a month off the streets of London, so it does work. I'm also interested in introducing technology in the future that will enable people to be scanned for knives at a distance.
Stop and search has also been blamed for disproportionately targeting the black community. Just related to that, there have been a spate of stabbings at the Notting Hill Carnival, and the Conservative candidate for London Mayor says it should be moved to a park, and that there is and I quote, a problem with crime in the black community. Do you endorse her comments?
Well, I think in terms of where the Notting Hill Carnival is staged, I would just suggest that we follow police advice on that.
But is there a problem with crime in the black community, as the Conservative candidate for London Mayor says?
Well, I don't think I'd put it in those terms. What we need to do is protect the public, and obviously young black men are often disproportionately the victims. And if you talk to the mothers of some of those young men, and sometimes even boys, who have been stabbed, they will say to you they wish there was more stop and search, and it's why I'm interested in exploring technology that will allow to scan people at a distance.
Is she a bit of a liability, your candidate for Mayor?
No, not at all. I mean, for example, she's been very clear that she will scrap Sadiq Khan's appalling ULEZ. His own evidence shows that it has...
Introduced by a Conservative mayor, by the way.
In central London. We're talking now about outer London, which is very different. So Susan Hall is absolutely right to say she'll scrap that. I think Londoners will support her.
I want to take you back to a previous job you held in the Home Office and just ask you about asylum and immigration, because today was the deadline that the government imposed for all Afghan refugees to be moved out of hotels. How many remain?
What I do know is that about 11,000 people, Afghans, have been moved out of hotels now, and I think by the end of today, 55 of these hotels will have been closed down, and the people will have been transitioned into mainstream accommodation. And after 2 years, that is what we expect to happen.
The backlog of asylum seekers awaiting a decision has reached a record high, and the Home Office would have to process 11,311 cases a month. They're currently doing an average of around 2,000. If the Prime Minister is to meet his pledge of clearing that backlog by the end of the year, he's not going to do it.
I know that my colleague, the Immigration Minister, has hired a whole load of extra decision makers. I think there's now well over 1,000. There was previously 500 or 600, and they plan to double that again to 2,500 decision makers. They're using technology to speed up the process. But of course, the way we're going to fix the asylum backlog is to stop illegal immigration, particularly by small boat, because those people are coming.
Yeah, but that's just adding to the backlog. Because these are people who are already here.
Yeah, but
you're processing 2,000 on average a month. But you've got to take that to over 11,000 to meet that pledge.
But it's really important to stop the inflow. The people coming on small boats are leaving France. France is a manifestly safe country, so we do need to stop the boats. It's disappointing Labour has consistently voted against legal measures to stop the boats. So that is why that's a Prime Ministerial priority.
But you haven't got a snowball's chance in hell of meeting that pledge, have you?
Well, as I say, the Immigration Minister is deploying additional resources. He's doubled the number of decision makers already. He's going to double it again, using technology, speeding up the process.
You think you can do it? You think you can meet that pledge?
Look, I think the Immigration Minister is pulling out all the stops to deal with these cases, and I've got every confidence in his work.
Chris Philp, thanks very much.
Thank you.